Hello, hello. Good afternoon.
Hello. Here we are again. Yay. We might just see the other people on the other pages if you want. Just take your time to tune in. Looks cold in Japan.
It sounds like some parts of California are without electricity, so I think some of
Yeah.
our friends there won't be joining us today. Atmospheric river descends. Good to see you. And let's get started. So, taking some time to just settle in to a seated posture, and that feels relatively stable. Easeful but upright. Noticing where the attention is naturally drawn in your moment to moment experience right now. Where it's drawn, where it's called. What do we notice about the objects we're observing, receiving? What do we notice about the mind, qualities that are receiving, observing, connecting? Starting to move into the understanding that all parts of the experience can be seen, observed, understood. The subject and the object. There's a sound, physical sensation, a smell, a memory. All of these things can be observed, received equally. As well as the impressions, opinions, sensations in the heart mind that arise in response to them. even the very subtle flavors of Vedana, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feeling tone that arises with any experience in the sense doors, or the mental volitional moments that impel the mind to act, manipulate, move the body, that impel the mind to move to another object. In this flurry of sensory experience, there's so much we can start to observe, not to control, manipulate, manage, so much as understand, fathom, comprehend what's really going on in this life, in this process of being and becoming, one moment to the next. So we can just sit here and try to observe all of it unfolding, one moment impacting the next. Leading our karma to move in one direction or another, dominoes falling. But the wildness and variety of all of this experience can be hard to track, trace. To maintain a sense of mindfulness and clarity within it. And so finding a primary object that's relatively neutral, that's changing in our fields of experience is a helpful way to stay connected to the movements of life and changing nature of reality without getting so immediately overwhelmed by the flood of fabrications. So sometimes that anchor can be in the body. Maybe it's an attunement to the sensations happening throughout the body, pressure, softness, hardness, tingling, warmth, coolness. pulsing, moisture, dryness, just receiving and observing the vast range of physicality. While sounds will also happen, thoughts will happen, many things will happen outside of this primary field. We don't need to ignore them, reject them, or be enthralled by them. We note them and see the value of coming back to the primary field of attention of the body. To gather the forces of heart and mind to bear on the unfolding sensations directly. And sometimes this field is still too wide, and so narrowing to where the hands are touching, or the area around the abdomen where the rising and falling of the breath can be noticed, are often very good options. Staying connected, concurrent with the full rising, full falling of the breath. Not manipulating or perfecting the physical experience, just curious, caring, receiving, connected. Or if that feels too narrow, too confining, even the whole body can feel that way at times. We can move to the stream of sound as our primary anchor. Always moving, always changing. Phenomena rising and passing at the ear door. Little space from ourselves at times. The same basic approach. Just observing. Committed to understanding. Fully receiving each sound or each physical sensation. Not taking it for granted. Assuming we know what it is. Beneath the idea, the concept, there's a direct experience. Vibration, tone, texture. Whose fundamental qualities can be understood. And the mind itself has these flavors, textures, can be received in the same way when it's predominant. When there's knowing, thinking, imagining, happiness, sadness. We see the mind as not some stable observer at the center of all of this. It is arising and passing with each moment, just like sound, just like the body. The way that it arises in response to sound, the way that it causes the arising of physical sensation. We see the interplay between all of these phenomena. What causes this to arise? What causes this to cease? Just by observing more and more honestly, gently, carefully. So Michelle and I thought we would take another week to take some questions, if anyone had them, about your practice, anything you might be wondering about or having challenges with, anything about our instructions or Dhamma offerings. The best way, as usual, if you have a question, at the bottom of the screen there's a reactions button, and you can click on that and click raise your hand, as Thomas has done, and we'll call on you. And if that isn't working, you can always just type into the chat that you have a question, we'll call on you, or flail around and hopefully we'll notice on the screen. Thomas.
Hello from Manila, Philippines.
Hi, Thomas.
Hi, I live on Oahu, but I've been stuck here for 10 and a half months against my will, in a way. It's due to a very inefficient, incompetent immigration system here. And so I'm really in a pretty hard lesson of equanimity, which I understand be, one woman defined it as a state of not wanting and not wanting. And in my case, I really want to be home with my fiance. And now we're 3 months pregnant with twins. And the healthcare is not the best here. And and every week, 3 days of that week, we think we're getting the go-ahead from immigration to go. But then, no, they want one other document. They want something else. They want something else. It was going on for 10 and a half months. It might be this week, but I'm just struggling with the wanting to hope and look forward to it, but then not wanting to be let down. It brought to mind my reading of Viktor Frankl, who was in Nazi camps, and he was a doctor, and he would see that when people in the camps who were at the verge of death, from starvation, would hear rumors of the Allies coming to rescue them, they would get a lot of hope. And then when it didn't come to fruition, those were the people who would die. And so I really would like some input from you on any suggestions of how I could make this hard lesson of equanimity a little less hard.
Do you want me to start, Jesse? Or,
Sure.
I think that the way that we can get fooled with teachings about equanimity is when we forget that the equanimity includes the wanting to go home. So it includes it includes a relationship with hope, or it includes a relationship with any aversion to what's happening. Or it's like often we we want the equanimity as peace with what's happening, but we'll see where we actually cannot be peaceful with what's happening. And then we forget that we can actually attempt to get a relationship with the hope or the hopelessness or the despair, or however that unfolds. I think the most important thing I could offer you is that you're getting practice with that that kind of progression of um, hope and hopelessness and despair and then peace. It's like um, that's good practice if you can appreciate that that's what the karmic lesson you're getting now. And I can give an example that is not at all on the Viktor Frankl side of things. It's more on the level of a little less, much less painful. An example. At quite a few of you at this Sunday sitting did attend the Chaswa monastery retreats in Burma, and often people would come to the retreat in Burma with an idea that it would be quiet there, and it was so not that uh, by sound. And at some point there would be a festival where music would be played on loudspeakers day and night. It was usually, when we would find out what was going on, which was usually the first few years, we had no idea. But over time, it was usually an ordination of a monk, a little monk or a nun, or, it was actually, everyone would be struggling with this rage and sleeplessness. But actually, when we would hear that it was actually this incredible village celebration of an ordination, we would feel more sheepish about being upset with the experience. But um, I don't see Tom anymore, but at any rate, that what I found, because I was my kuti, the place I stayed was at the top of a hill, and so the acoustics were kind of triple that everyone else was getting, and by 2 or 3 in the morning, after days of it, I would notice, see this, it was being played on a record like the old days, and so you'd hear. I was getting so attuned to the end of the song, the sound, right? And then I would notice this hope coming up, and it would hit this place of like, oh, like it would proliferate into I'm going to get some sleep, it's going to stop, this incredible, the yogis are going to be happy, this whole shift. And then there'd be this pause, and then there'd be the sound of the needle and the sound of the songs, the next song starting up. And I'm only offering this because in that state of being so worn out, I could see my only option was getting a relationship with hope and hopelessness. And it was very powerful to just get so much practice with it, actually. Like, it was amazing. And there's so much learning around even those deep 3 characteristics of existence that the Buddha taught: anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, that experience isn't reliable. And that this big teaching here is that if you could do something to make this different, you would, right? Like it's like I would guess the level of effort you have made, right, to um, try to change this, and to have that sense of making full effort without attachment to the result of the effort. That's another aspect of equanimity that's so deep, in that all that effort was good effort, but it doesn't necessarily mean we can that the motivation, if it's attached to the result of the goodness of the effort, you're going to suffer. So I'm saying that these are very important teachings for you. Very big, very important, because they're so hard. You really cannot control this situation.
Mm-mm.
But it doesn't mean that the hope the hopelessness or despair are wrong or bad. It means that your system is telling you that it doesn't like the situation. What, like, of course, right? Of course you hope that it's going to change. Of course you get hopeless. Like that to accept the humanity of that, especially with having the healthcare situation on top of it, that there's so much to get frustrated with. And I must say that if you can attempt to keep working with this as, this is a test, this is a test, this is a test, this is a test, your practice gets to kick in again and kick in again and kick in again, rather than something's wrong or bad.
Yeah, the powerlessness is unbelievable. We have a lawyer working with us here. She's going today to get one more day. And right now it's a less than 2 hour layover in Japan, and they're demanding documents like Heidi's health records, And then, yeah. So meanwhile, at home, all my plants are dead, Didn't see my daughter for almost a year, all the important birthdays and Father's Day. And it's water under the bridge. But yeah, the powerlessness and the nonsensical nature of it. It's just, if it were just, well, there was a earthquake here and it's just a long way, then it'd be a lot easier to accept. But there's just no
Right.
sense. And they're in the news. I'm not the only one. I think I'm probably one of the longest ones, or we are. So it's we. I could go home, but I'm not going home without her, in this state especially. So, yeah, but the powerlessness is certainly hard and the nonsensical nature of it, I'm a psychologist. I like things to make sense. I like to, there's a reason why there are others who are ahead of us or something. Kind of random.
It's not fair. It's not
Yeah.
fair.
No, no,
It's not fair. No,
no.
it's,
It,
there are
it's
the
actually,
diet,
it's
the
actually,
dyads,
no, go ahead.
the dyads. It's powerlessness
Yeah.
and rage, hope and hopelessness. It's like you're
Yeah.
getting a good, incredible experience of what it's like for a lot of people on this planet,
Yeah.
actually. And
Yeah.
it hurts. It's very painful. And that's what, you can't make something painful pleasant.
It does help when I hear another news story about the recent one is a woman who lives in the US, has a home in the Bay Area, and she's been stuck in Manila for 2 months because she can't afford the $3,000 for the oxygen tank because she has COPD. She can't fly home to be with her son. Yeah, and you hear about this all the time. They're in the news a lot about corruption and ineptitude. So that seems to help. That it's not just some weird fluke happening to us, it's fairly pervasive. Yeah, thank you.
Jesse, I assume you have something else to say about it. Maybe not.
I mean, I think to like one part of what Michelle said, to just like the reminder, it's like the problem is your mind. You know what I mean? Like that's the problem. And to take responsibility for that is the hardest thing, right? That like there are, you're encountering like a lot of really difficult conditions, and anytime we are focused on the object versus the wanting or not wanting as the suffering, then that's a misunderstanding. The suffering is your own wanting or not wanting.
Mm.
And that's ultimately like what it comes down to. And I think that there are tricks you can play with yourself around putting it into perspective. There's tricks that go the wrong way. You are not in a concentration camp, like, right? Like, you're not in Gaza, and like, you can go get some huli chicken and you could learn like Tagalog, and you could actually like have meaningful, connected like relationships with the people you're around, and because there's the other version of like, well, what if you end up being there for another 10 months? Like, what if you're there for a few years? And like, what's your orientation going to be? Is it going to like just kind of like go deeper and deeper into this, or is there like a way to take stock of what you wish was happening, to not deny that, to feel the pain of like the lack of connection, family, friends, healthcare. Like, I mean, there's a lot you are missing, right? And there's the concern about your child, of course. I mean, that's like huge, and your partner's health. I mean, I'm not underplaying those realities,
Mhm.
and there is also the sense of like, what if you were never to go home? What if it never what if were in the Philippines forever? And like, how would that maybe change your orientation toward like your daily life and what you're doing? And like, do you still find, why is it that the groove of like frustration and resentment is um, getting dug more deeply versus trying to dig something else, right? In terms of kindness and caring and enjoying, and protecting this unborn being in a field not just of anxiety and stress, but of possibility, and creating like a little bit of an atmosphere and to know how hard that is in the frustration, in the wanting. But it's like hope is poison, and it's just, you don't want it. The less your heart like seeks solace in that, the more free you'll be in like the reality of like your ability to connect in a caring, open-hearted way with the people around you and with the conditions you find yourself in. So I just, I so like Michelle said, for sure, it's like getting a taste of like what some the bureaucracies in some places and the levels of dysfunction and all of that. And it's really hard and it's frustrating, and yeah, like it's like, could this be it's like a vehicle for compassion too, of like how many people live in these sort of situations, have to deal with this all the time, and not that that means you want to, but there is a sense of like, oh, this is like how a lot of the world is for a lot of people. So anyway, it's like, yeah, really, that there is this level of like the weariness and the frustration and the nightmare of that. You hear about them during COVID. This happened with a lot of people, right? People are stuck in some country for like forever, and yet it's like, what do you do? What are you gonna do to like protect your mind so that you're using it to get free, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah. We hope you make it home soon. Mm.
Well, every week there's about 3 days that we think it's going to happen and it doesn't. So getting used to it. I don't hope as much. It is hard. It is hard to tell people back home because they just don't believe it.
Mhm.
It's been so long. It's interesting how certain people develop certain paranoid delusions about what's happening because it's so hard for them to believe that a system could be so dysfunctional, and it's based on who they are. They love horror movies, or whatever. It's I see it all kind of relating to that, but I'm a psychologist too. What else am I going to do? So, with my free time. But I have come to appreciate the efficiency with which our government works. It works compared to here, and it is a blessing. So,
Well, we were trying to get a visa for a nun to visit last year, and it never happened. Months and months went by. An American embassy, it didn't happen. So
yeah, no, the
it's all
American embassy here has been great. Patient keeps renewing both our visas.
good luck, Tom.
Yeah.
Luca,
This is not so much a question as I was listening to some old talks in the last couple of years and was hearing a lot of Michelle's stories about the feral cats. And the I don't know, I used to be kind of like, oh, here comes another feral cat story. But they sunk in. And I really appreciated the unconditionality of the compassion. It was a really powerful teaching, and I just wanted to say thank you.
Do you miss hearing my stories? I have more.
Oh no, I'll look forward to more of them. Thank you.
I'm just going to put in here that a lot of our domestication is a thin veneer, a very, 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 very thin veneer. And so what I appreciate about the feral cats and why I do talk about them is that they are so transparent. They don't have the veneer of domestication or civilization to protect them from us seeing their terror or their anxiety or their greed or their, they don't have any defense system that protects them in that way that we have to some degree. More, some of us have more or less. But I think that when you do this practice, that thin veneer starts to get thinner and thinner and thinner, and the mindfulness and the Brahma Viharas et cetera, are supposed to replace the defense system gradually. And so I think, as Jesse describes the wildness of the mind, there is something to learn from other beings that are so close to us in some ways, but also very different. So yeah, I'm glad you brought it up, because I think it's that level to which the history of humans has been a lot to feel superior to other beings when they're really missing so much teaching could possibly get less greed, hatred, and delusion by learning from other beings, I think is a shame and tragic. Yeah, so thank you.
they're a good doorway into the next level of really understanding Michelle's puddle stories. So you
Yes,
can
the
think of
puddles
it
are
as training. Yeah.
the puddles are higher teaching. Yes. Much higher. I don't see anyone out there with that puddle but me, frankly, but oh well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Eileen or Rob?
Yes.
Hey.
You're fine.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Arlene.
Okay, now I can see you all. I want to thank you. I don't know if you recall my question about a month ago where there's one, and I definitely have, especially you, Michelle, told you have, we've been trying to do this, tell you to do this for the past 20 years or something. But anyway, and in one example that I had given about meditating in the last, a month ago, and I said, well, my mind is like, and I, and you both, being who you are, said, well, why are you sitting so for half an hour, Arlen? Get up, go do. So, for a month, I've kind of meditated every morning for a half an hour, and for 15 minutes I walked. And one thing, I think in all my practice, somehow joy is something, it comes up, it's there, it's whatever, but it's, and then there's and so while I've been walking now, I've been swaying. It's almost like I'm, and I'm inside, and it's like, I used to do belly dancing. So it's like, okay, and I put my hip out and I put my other hip out. And there's such, and I'm giggling, almost like I hear you giggle all the time, Michelle. And I say, yeah, I can giggle too. This is all about thanking you. But also in relationship to the animals, I have a big stone feeder that is not covered up, and I feed the birds every day. And I come out and I say, okay, come and get it. And they do. And then the squirrel comes. And I say, well, he needs more food than the birds, And so, and I'm more like a squirrel than I am like a wonderful myth. So I think that I just want to thank you both for encouraging me to be silly and to be, what I was going to do is I'm going to do it, you say, and so I want to thank you both, and also, say to others maybe that, walking your way or swinging a little, or that's part of life too. And it may be uncomfortable in the beginning, because we're following a form and we want to be a good person. And although I like to break rules. So anyway, that's my feedback. Thank you.
Bravissimo, Arlene. Bravissimo.
And in February, no less,
Right.
it's not like it's springtime and this is like what one might expect. Yeah, that's wonderful. Well,
And this is what we mean by courageous energy, Arlene. It's courage. It's courage to be heroic in a traditional sense, and it's heroic to be courageous in a non-traditional sense. It's because the Buddha taught skillful means, and ultimately courage is skillful means, and learning what skillful means is, it's all under that category of right energy, right? So you're discovering that it's not just one way of being.
Thank you.
I think it has so much to do with what is hard about the way we try to teach, which is, on one hand, so much gratitude and appreciation, devotion to the structure and the forms, that we've inherited, through the lineage, and how just amazing they are, and the other side of like understanding that at some point, for most people, it needs to feel like it's not something we're just imposing on ourselves, that it's in a different kind of relationship to our kind of natural patterns and personalities and tendencies, and of course it's like we know that it can't be the whole, we're not just falling back on our patterns and our personalities, but that there's the value of that in terms of like a deeper faith, and the courage it takes is, yeah, really, really powerful, and how encouraging we want to be of that, and how encouraging we want to be of the methods and the forms, for people to also learn. It's maybe when Michelle writes her autobiography, that aspect, I feel like, of your story, Michelle, of like, just the rigorous training and the commitment to that, for so many years, and then how hard, but also how necessary it felt to you to have to do things in a different way at a certain point for yourself that honored your other lineages in your heart, and who you were, and the way you're constructed, and what that might mean for us, like on all kinds of levels, our families, our cultures, our um without throwing the other one out, without feeling like it's a rejection of all of the form and method, which is it's a much harder dance to do, right? To not sort of just swing totally in the other direction out of like a kind of whatever, but that sort of mature place of
I
trying to
think,
navigate these things. Yeah.
I think for me, it's not swinging in another direction, like, oh, okay, I was, so strict with myself, and then, okay, I'm gonna go in. But it was, and is an allowance of, while I'm doing the practice, not, and in life, of if there is, this kind of surprising joy that comes up, which I'm, much better at looking at what's wrong and trying to fix it, then I think that I've become comfortable enough to open up that door, and to realize that I can pull away from it. And I think both of you, as teachers, have are incredible at doing that and inviting that. Where, I mean, at least for me, there's no question that we're talking about the practice and being serious. So I want to thank you again.
Caroline. Before Rose, just quickly, I want to just, Mona, I put this quote here in the chat, just just the kind of interesting take on the way things are fundamentally. All things are fundamentally mind. In other words, there's no real distinction between mind and matter, from Khenpo Rinpoche. And it's like a cool pointing out to something that is like really different between the lineages, that it's like I have a sense of that being some Tibetan lineages are have that kind of perspective. And just to say that in the kind of classical Theravadan lineages of, especially out of Burma, that are kind of both sutta based and commentarial based. It's like the fundamental distinction between mind and matter is like essential in terms of understanding the Dhamma. and it's like the primary, it's the first real insight that people have in terms of like true Vipassana insights, is the distinction between mind and matter. And that, and yet, of course, even at the times of the Buddha or after the Buddha passed away, there were all these schools that developed, and some were similar to this, of like there was that everything is mind, or that nothing is mind, or there is no mind, or whatever. And so it's one of these places where all of the lineages have like, there's such a variety of perspective. They all have their kind of like coherence in terms of where that notion like that fits into the structure. And it's always one of these cool things that's just like, let's to explore, is there a difference between mind and matter? And is that something we actually, on an experiential level, what is that? Or is there a distinction? And it's such an important part of the practice, not just the realization of that, but that particular exploration, even if this lineage kind of comes into a sort of out with a different place in terms of the understanding. But yeah, thanks for posting it. Then Rose, did you have a question?
Hi, everyone. I don't know if it's a question. Maybe I'll come into a question. I'm bad at asking precise questions. I feel like I was listening to a talk by Ajahn Amaro. I was really appreciating it. And he was talking about the Hiriotapa, like he was calling it the guardians of the world. And I really liked how he talked about sort of like learning how to learn, or like this the sting or the ache we feel when an unwholesome act has occurred, right? Whether it's our own or beholding somebody else. And I know that's a place I get caught in so frequently. And so I think my my mindfulness moments are getting tinier as I'm able to look at this. But basically, I feel like this sting happens. And I know, Michelle, you talk about kind of going near into the quicksand, and then boom, I'm so self-disgusted, or with somebody else or myself, or blah, 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 blah. And I'm like totally lost, right? But he's like, can you see the sting more as like a signal of pain, right? Like any other pain point, like as if you had a gash on your back, you need to feel pain in order to know something unskillful happened, fix it, go right, not go left, right? Like it's not a judgment that you feel like the sting. It's not something bad. And I think so often I say, oh, I feel this way. I deserve to feel this way. Right? Like I'm supposed to feel the consequences of these actions. Like I'm supposed to suffer. Blah, 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 blah. But no, it's more like, can you feel the sting and see it as like a signal? Again, like go that way instead of that way. Yeah, and I think it's connected to something I've been sort of like circulating in my mind lately about the concept of like perfection and freedom aren't the same thing. Like we're so imperfect and yet we can still feel free. Like whether we're perpetrators or perpetrated against, and the mixture of all of it, we can still feel free. Like a murderer can still feel free. It's like the acknowledgement, the sting, the hiriotapa, and then sort of like going upward and onward towards, enlightenment. So that's just some of my thoughts for right now, a little bit.
I'm sure we both have, things to
Yeah.
kind of reflect on.
I think one of the things that can be a helpful angle to come into this is with renunciation. And so often we think of renunciation as kind of a sacrifice of giving up, but it can be seen as a kindness for. So giving up harming ourselves or others, right? You're talking about harm, right, Rose? Yes. So that I like to take it out of all that initially and just think about to find an entry point through kindness. And so that the intention to not to harm is kindness. So that when the guilt, right? What's that sting? It's like initially it's a quivering of the heart. It like something hurts, right? It's unpleasant, it's painful. We've caused harm, or someone has caused harm, but it's behavior. It's all like, if you really want to unravel it, yeah, you have to unravel it through intention. So aversion, if somebody is identified with a moment of aversion and then causes harm to themselves or other, it's not the person, right? It's a mind state that has been believed and then brought into action. And out of great kindness, you want to feel that you don't want to cause harm. That's the sting, hopefully. The sting is that if we've caused it, but also if it's been caused, again, it's like, where did that action that caused harm come from? It's usually a temporary identification with greed, hatred, and delusion. And that's why we practice. We practice out of great compassion and kindness for all of us, so that what? We try to stop the behavior. Yeah. So yes, you're saying, I think, that it's good to feel the pain of it. Yeah. That's the only way you're going to stop. But I'm saying that without the kindness, I don't think it sticks. It's like, I think that getting the motivation to stop harm, if it's not kindness, then what is it? So I guess I think that sometimes we need multiple angles to understand how profound Hiri and Opatupa really are. Yeah, it's like the fear of not being mindful because we're going to cause pain, or the fear of others' lack of mindfulness because they're going to cause pain, and then the shame of causing pain. The translations in and of themselves are not enough. Like, the translations don't really help us untangle the tangle. But I think that the kindness and getting an understanding intention, and then untangling behavior from loving kindness, and then getting that on a very deep level, we don't want to hurt. We don't want to harm. If you really tune into your heart, you can't possibly want to cause harm or be harmed. So the Buddha said, who can untangle this tangle? It's so beautiful. So that, yeah, that pain in the heart is, if people aren't feeling it, that's the problem. And then being kind. Kind, 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 kind.
I'm not sure if I can't. My apologies if one of you did say this, but I'll just clarify that the Hiri and Otapa are often translated as moral shame and moral dread. So this, anyway, that's the doorway into this kind of conversation around action and wholesome or unwholesome actions, or harmful or beneficial actions. It's like, do we feel this quality of moral shame, which is considered a wholesome quality when we've harmed someone, if we've acted out of anger or greed or ignorance, is there this pain, right? This sting of recognition of harm or of responsibility because of our, that we may have generated, and then moral dread as this kind of concern for not wanting to do that in the future. And so this impulse towards carefulness and towards kindness to prevent that. And those translations are often very difficult for, I don't know, there's a lot of resistance often to sort of like taking those in, because shame is considered to be a bad thing and dread is considered to be a bad thing. And of course, the Buddha is also very clear that like to live in identification of shame, right, and remorse and regret is unwholesome. It's an obstacle to the practice, or to live in terror of like your own evil act in the future is like not actually a good way to live. So you have to be careful with understanding that these translations are imperfect, and it's really getting at like this very particular quality, like Rose, you're saying, of like, um, something that is a helpful moral guide in the heart for our actions, of evaluating what we've done and concern about moving forward, and it is intended to be that, like a compass, and that there is a useful moral compass that we can tap into, and kind of just like, I think so much of what's really difficult, including this question around perfection that you brought up, it's like, is around this identification, the question of identification with bad action, with harmful action, and I'm a bad person, and like the sort of that really believing that we are these things, or the identification with perfection, right? That we are not, or that we desire to have the feeling of self-perfection, which is like a future identification aspiration, so there's a lot in there. And then there is this weird, it's part of this paradox of like, well, if there isn't a coherent self that's solid and stable, and there isn't, identification with the stuff is part of the problem, but at the same time we do have to take responsibility for our actions, right? That there's enough coherence, and there is enough, it's not that we don't exist, right, and don't have responsibility for our actions. So it just feels like you're right at you're at some like very cool point of like something has something has like popped in your head and heart around it. Some languaging has worked for you, and it's like stirring up the pot in a good way, that there's like an aliveness to this question that feels liberatory versus like it's crashing in on you, because I think that's sometimes what people have, is this sense of like, oh, moral shame, moral dread, and it's like, like, but versus like, oh, you're starting to see the way in which it's like identification is playing out in this stuff, and um, self-evaluation versus evaluation of the action, or and what is it mental action, what is verbal action, what is physical action. You start to see that there's like a huge range of exploration in this around ethics, and carefulness, and these, motivating forces that Michelle was talking about. How do we want to be relating to people? How do we want to be relating to ourselves? Do we take our self-action as ones that we're equally sensitive to, right? Like how we treat ourselves, as equally important in terms of Hiri and Ottappa. So it's great. Sounds like you're in a really rich place with it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I would say one thing is maybe just, I think it's important to be careful about the notions of perfection that come from the tradition, there's times when they can be inspiring, and there's times where they can be so alien feeling, like how perfect the Buddha was, or how perfect all these monks and nuns were. And there's some, just to be careful, there's something about again, it's like parts of that might be inspiring and motivating, and energizing for us, and other parts of it where it feels so far from where we are, and you don't know really what's myth and what's real, and what does it really mean that like that someone is perfect, right? And kind of like, what does that even mean, and do they never cause harm? Do they never cause, have the intention to do it? It's like, don't get too bogged down in it, and know that there's like the aspiration to perfect as a verb, to kind of be always moving in a certain direction. And the more we do, the more we are sensitive to the places that are unresolved, and are where we're still entangled, and so that sometimes this forces of Hiri-Ottappa can actually get more pronounced, because we see more clearly the places that we're, some of these patterns are entrenched.
I also want to just appreciate that the sense that I get is that the way you describe the mindfulness of the sting, and that it's getting more, it seems like it's getting more precise, but open, allowing, and more precise and allowing. And I think sometimes the sting is non-conceptual. Like sometimes we get hit. I don't know, do you feel like there's a way that that's non-conceptual at first?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that I think that it's to have a great respect for that, and to give it time. Because it's the most important part. And then how we integrate that into conceptual thought and intention is how the freedom happens.
Thank you both.
Rose. Is it Margot? Did you have a question there?
I wanted to follow up on Luca's and Arlene's gratitude for the way that you two teach, and also tie in to the discussion about karmic knots that's been ongoing for some time, and the comments about heroic energy. I've been working with a karmic knot around fear for many years. This started as like anxiety and then became fear, and in recent years has become abject, absolute terror. And I've been working with it in that heroic, energetic way, and have been trying to be with it when it arises and explore it and investigate it. And Jesse, you may remember an interview during one retreat in the last few years where I described spending 8 hours in the middle of the night, curled up in the fetal position with the mental mode of overwhelmed and helpless, overwhelmed and helpless. And I had a moment after, I think it was 2 weeks ago, maybe, Michele, you made a distinction between heroic energy, and I can't remember if you called it soft energy, but anyway, non-heroic energy. And I thought a light bulb went on. And in the last week, while I was brushing my teeth or something, I had a visual image of this little being. I don't want to go the inner child discourse, but this little being who was terrified. And all these years, I've been turning my back on this being because I've been relating to the fear with such aversion and such an intention to make it go away. And all of what you've said about giving your system messages that it's safe, suddenly all came home. And I realized that I needed to be relating to the fear in a totally different way. And so and it's so much lighter. I mean, the fear comes the same as it always has. But instead of kind of grinding into it, I'm just kind of saying, I see you, I know you, and I'm not going to turn my back on you. And I've said to this being, I can't promise you that you won't be afraid anymore, but I can promise you I won't leave you alone. So you can see and hear the level of release that this has brought about is so profound. And my gratitude to both of you is very profound. So thank you.
Now that is a relationship.
Mm.
That's what we're trying to teach.
Yeah. And
Why
you
would
are
you want, why would we want to get rid of that relationship?
Yeah. Well, and why would I repeat what the reason why I have the fear? I've just been replicating the assaults that are at the root of the fear. And I use the word assault in a very general way. I'm not wanting to over dramatize the circumstances of my life.
Nisargadatta says we repeat it until we understand it.
Well, I've also been reading his book for the past several months, and it's blown my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like helpful to think of eons, samsara eons, and then this intensity of liberation you get that you can apply this to anything that appears. Yeah. You can apply that to anything that appears.
Mhm.
Mm.
Think about, so I think maybe Kay a few weeks ago brought up the question of Mara, and is it worth kind of like having the personification of delusion, in the tradition? Is it worth trying to kind of engage with this being as a being, not just as a metaphor? And it's so complex, and I think, I think one way into that is through what you're doing, and the way that to me feels is like, one of the hard things about the tradition, or one of the, not just hard, it's like one of the beautiful things, but also maybe out of balance things, is the way Mara tends to be treated throughout these episodes, in where Mara pops up and is trying to get the Buddha to come off his path, or get other lay people or monks or nuns to kind of go back into the realms of relishing, etc. And it's often, there's many ways in which it's portrayed as like this battle against Mara, as like the victorious experience, of liberation. And yeah, you see still in plenty of places in the suttas and in the commentaries where they try to bring it more relationally, right? Where it's like, well, actually, Mara many lifetimes ago was a cousin of the Buddha's, and he's actually like a lonely, broken person, and doesn't want people to get liberated because it adds his sense of being abandoned. And suddenly there's like this sort of this dimensionality to the character, right? That's not just like, oh, it's wickedness, but especially the one where the nun, and so there's like this kind of patriarchal kind of like framework around Mara often. But then you have these other modes, and I think particularly around this nun Upalavana, or I'll sometimes read that sutta of hers at times, but she has this sort of dialogue back and forth with Mara, who's trying to hassle her. she talks about how skillful her mind is, how incredibly versatile and how much power she has of her, in her practice or mental capacity. And so there, and at the end, she just says, and therefore I don't fear you, friend. And that sense of like calling him friend, it's like, it's just not something I've seen in a lot of places. Maybe it's translations, maybe I've missed them, but that sense of like, oh, this how do we relate to something that feels like is a plague in our heart, or is just this demon, or something that is like we feel like we need to supersede and get over, versus like this very different relationship of of balanced kindness, of total friendship, total connection, and lack of fear. But also, in that sense, of very, lack of stickiness, kind of any kind with it. Um, and not that I think it's all, I don't, you don't necessarily want to go into the sort of, like you said, the inner child version. I don't think it's necessarily helpful to go into the Mara version of it, but there's some sense of like these difficult places. And of course we relate to them fearfully. Of course we're antagonistic to them. Of course we feel like we need to get rid of them or run away from them or whatever, and yet what a sign it is in our practice and in our hearts when it's like, it's like a which came first, you'll never know, but did the kindness towards this lead towards more spaciousness with it? Has your ability to be with it in a spacious way led to the opening of kindness towards these things? It doesn't really matter. It's to say that, to understand that they're both there, they're both playing out in your practice, which is your heart, right? Your mind. So just how beautiful an expression that is, just to kind of honor that, really, of understanding that there is both this sort of balanced mind that is arising alongside this caring mind, and that is very important to like recognize in terms of what you're seeing, that it's not just one or the other, that it's why metta and equanimity are, they might seem like there's ways that they can seem that they're in opposition to each other if they're not in balance. But when they're in balance, it's like, that's what you're describing, right? That's what Upalavana describes. That's like you've ended the war. And yeah, that promise you made of like, it's not, you don't know, you can't promise a lot about the future, but this commitment to stay in relationship and try to find that place of caring is really beautiful.
Yeah, I think that kind of brings in the thing about renouncing, like with Hiriotama, it's like harming ourselves, right? That resistance to that learned, right? That learned mercilessness with that fear, right? That learned that's a learned harming of ourselves. And the renunciation is renouncing that harm for yourself through kindness, right? Like that's why I wanted to piece. I'm just trying to piece that together, that when we understand, it's really the safety is the kindness. The safety is the intention to have the relationship. And it's such a radical change with a karmic knot. It's such a huge achievement.
Thank you.
Mm. I think I just want to say one more thing about it, because it's like when we have this, and then I think we get this sense that, oh, like, when it comes again, it's like, oh, like I didn't really want to have a relationship with this, like, right? Like it's painful, right? So like it's almost like that learned, like, oh, I didn't really want a relationship with this, but you start to get that that's the safety, and it's so powerful. Like there's less and less fear of the fear. So the fear has less power, right? So it's like, it's not like the next time it comes around, it's like, oh boy, a picnic. but it's like a fear tea party. A teddy bear picnic. Yes, that sounds good.
Mm.
Hmm.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, really wonderful to be with you again this week.
Mm.
Take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Hopefully we'll see you next Sunday.